Hello, my name is Sarah Zedek, my pronouns are she, her, and I want to talk about the new Murder by Death album, Spellbound. If I do my job correctly, this video will come out the same weekend that the album itself comes out. I backed this on Kickstarter, and it got here a week early. I have been a big fan of Murder by Death for a long time. And when I made this channel, I called it Let's Talk About Stuff, specifically because I didn't want to be railroaded into only talking about movies or games. So here is me taking advantage at last of the stuff in the Let's Talk About title. Now this album is good. I like it. I've only had it in my ears for a couple of days now. But I wanted to talk about it because I've listened to a lot of Murder by Death, and this album, Spellbound, is good. It's a good album. You should listen to it. But I think it is remarkable specifically because of what it does at the end of 20 years of this band making music. It feels remarkable specifically because of its place in their discography. And this is like the one band on earth that I know enough about to be able to do this kind of thing with, because it actually is not a great time to have been a fan of emo and indie rock in the early to mid 2000s and the early 2010s. A lot of those guys really did not age very well. And I should say before I talk about anything at length here that I don't really know anything about the band. I don't know any lore. I don't really know if there even is any lore. I just like their music. So there's not really like tertiary side material like, oh, I swear, dude, Coheed and Cambria is great if you just read the comic. There's none of that. It's just the music that I'm talking about. So if you like it, that's great. But if you don't like it, all right, comrade, be on your way. I like Coheed and Cambria just fine. I don't know why. So what kind of music is Murder by Death? Well, there's sort of murder folk, whiskey-soaked punk rock. I don't really know genres. I just listen to the music. I don't really know. It's music about outlaws and cowboys and dudes going into bars and getting drunk and having sex with women for money and gambling and killing each other and just doing all sorts of crimes and then being caught for those crimes and then going to jail and maybe breaking out of jail, but also maybe getting the fucking electric chair. I guess I would describe their sound as like if Ennio Morricone was the lead of a punk bluegrass fusion band. And that's not even really a joke because they have a song called Theme for Ennio Morricone. The influence is quite obvious in their instrumentation. I think if you were to listen to one song off of every single one of their albums, you would be able to tell this is definitely the same band. But they've had a very interesting sonic evolution that I want to talk about for the context so that we can talk about Spellbound. Anyway, Murder by Death is similar to Pink Floyd in the sense that their first two albums are kind of weird, a little off-putting, but not necessarily in a bad way. They're like experimental and strange, but also brilliant in a way that still completely bounces off of me. And, you know, I respect them for what they are, but they don't. Also, there are people who insist that, no, actually, those were the only two good albums that the band ever made, in fact, which is fine, I guess, as an opinion to have, but you don't have to be a dick about it. Coheed and Cambria is great if you just read the comic. Their second era is when I found out about them with 2008's In Boca al Lupo and 2010's Red of Tooth and Claw. This is when they developed the sharp, expressive sound that is what really got me hooked on them. I was actually introduced to Murder by Death by my online friend Stacy. We traded guitar tricks back and forth. It was mostly her trading tricks to me. and she introduced me to this band. I'm going to tell a story that involves her in a little bit, but it's kind of a depressing story, so I'm just going to say hi to Stacy now if she's watching this. I don't know. Anyway, this is the stuff that I really know them for. Like I described earlier, it's whiskey-soaked stories of the devil and people killing other guys and etc., etc. But for all the gaudiness of the subject matter, it doesn't feel gross or mean. It never feels to me like Murder by Death is enjoying the subject that they're writing about. It's very explicitly like character stories. All of their songs are written from a perspective of somebody who is like witnessing an event or experiencing it or you know, committing a crime. It always feels like Murder by Death is like the band that plays in the background while these scenes are happening. Like they're up on a stage doing their thing. It's like an early 2000s music video where it would be like them in old-fashioned attire on a stage playing in the background, and they're singing about a bar fight, and then a bar fight happens. Maybe that actually exists. I started seeing it in my mind as I was describing it. I think that might actually exist. So I'm going to read you some lyrics from the song Rum Brave. So I came upon a shanty town full of bitter men, where carved into a crude wood sign it read, "Welcome to the end." For $1 you could buy a girl of every possible design, but you couldn't find one decent man or a word spoken in kind. This is a pretty typical subject for Murder by Death. An apocalyptic western town full of ne'er-do-wells and evildoers who are suffering as they do bad things. And like the song has a perspective. It says, you know, you couldn't find one decent man. There is this idea that what we are doing is not decent. What I am doing is not decent. It's not like Murder by Death is encouraging people to do like Old West crimes, although maybe with the state of Texas right now they should be. It's more about like Adam Turla standing there up on the stage and like looking out and seeing like some fucked up stuff happening, and him just being like, wow, that's fucked up. That's my Adam Turla impression. He has a really deep baritone. I don't know, these albums just really work for me because it's like the band sounds like what is appropriate for their subject matter. They sound like their stories. And that synthesis of subject with form is really pleasing to me. And they're also just really fun to sing along to. Like it's just fun music. I will destroy everything of beauty. Which is maybe telling on me a little bit that I grew up with like westerns and was sort of like running around in Oklahoma prairie land. There's a pervasive sense of doom in these albums that just feels really honest to me. It feels correct for the region. It kind of reminds me of the Jim Jarmusch film Dead Man.
Look, we're shooting buffalo.
And that brings us to Good Morning Magpie, which is a very different album than the previous two. Adam Turla apparently just sort of disappeared into the Kentucky wilderness for 6 months and came back with this album written, just sort of came up with it. I hyperfixated on this album so hard that I ended up writing an entire novel based on it called Good Morning Magpie. I actually wrote it. I wrote the ending on the day of the Mayan apocalypse in 2012 in my granddad's drafting room. My granddad was an engineer. He made a train whistle. I have it over here, actually. My granddad carved this train whistle. Man, people born in the 30s, they sure were built different. So there's a couple of classic Murder by Death setups on this album. There's one that is Dark Streets Below that is, you know, about prostitutes and sex workers, and all of them being sort of abandoned. But most of the songs on the album are about this pervasive sense of doom and the literal apocalypse. The title track is a story about a dove carrying a magpie away from the end of the world, an image that is what inspired the book that I wrote. But it's the last two tracks, White Noise and The Day, that I really want to focus on. Now, every Murder by Death album ends with a very apocalyptic, sort of solo-filled musical breakdown, and it is doomed, whether it's on the sense of experiencing a guy being electrocuted to death in the electric chair, or, as in the case with Good Morning Magpie, witnessing a biblical level apocalypse. White Noise is from the perspective of a demonic figure who tramples flowers in gardens, speaking of the day when the oceans will boil and the weak and the damned are pulled under, their bones destined to become the residences of sea life. He asks whether there will be any record of the terror left after its conclusion, a question met by The Day, which describes the day that presumably this ancient lord will come and wipe everything off the face of the earth. Here are some lyrics from The Day. All the rattlesnakes came down from the mountains, and the kings all became slaves. The trees gave up their roots from the earth, and the lepers left their caves on the day that my Lord came. The coyotes left their dens, the horses left their stables, and they bowed down to the ground, every creature that was able. A blanket of moss will cover the earth, and I'll know that the day came. This is like biblical stuff, but it's biblical in a very like folksy manner. It's like a hobo apocalypse, if that makes any sense. What I also find interesting that this illustrates, though, is that there's never an after the apocalypse with Murder by Death, which makes sense. Like, there's calling to question whether or not there will be a record of the terror after all of it is over. But it seems to be that what's left is oblivion. It's sort of like where they come to is the tension of futility, the feeling that you stand beneath the boot heel as an ant and you're trying to make sense of why you would have to die underneath this crushing weight. But there isn't an answer. It's just a thing that is happening, and it's all futile, and the song just sort of ends. And so many of the final songs on Murder by Death albums just kind of peter out at the end because the apocalypse has happened and everything has come crashing down, and that's just sort of it. Now, after Good Morning Magpie, they did 4 more albums. This is like the Kickstarter era. They've done a Kickstarter for each of those 4 albums. And I'm not really going to talk about them. I should. I'm not skipping them because they're not good. I'm skipping them because they're not really relevant to... They're not as relevant as what I'm to what I'm talking about as the first few albums are. I could make the case for them if I wanted to. I just don't want to make this video be much longer than it's already gonna be. I do very specifically recommend The Other Shore. It's a sci-fi concept album. It's really good. I love that album a lot. So go listen to that too if you want. And this gets us to Spellbound, the new album, which is the first album of theirs that I feel like is explicitly political, which is why I wanted to talk about it. And I think it's political, like you can hear in the lyrics that it is political in certain places, but I think it's especially clear when you have the context of the rest of their music. So here's lyrics from the second track, Never Be. Someone taught you wrong, kid. You've been harping on about a world where only killers get ahead. You're still listening to that thing under your bed. Now I made my house a home, a shelter from the storm, but no man has ever made it alone. Only the fakers and the cheats will tell you so. This admonishment of the kid who is fantasizing about or fixating on these like criminal narratives is especially interesting when you know that they have used this exact song structure to tell the opposite story of like people like celebrating this kind of lifestyle, and they've even had other songs of like parents addressing their kids to very different effects. Spellbound is an apocalyptic album, but it's apocalyptic in a very different sense. It sort of strips away musically the Southern Gothic Western trappings that kept the subject matter at a distance and brings it more into this echoey, sort of hollowed out sense of living in a world where this is normal and realizing that all of these crimes, all this violence exists in a context. At the risk of reaching a bit too far, it feels kind of like a proletarianization of their sound in the sense of pulling back from the kind of the genre trappings and revealing what genuine humanity looks like in a world where that kind of cruelty that they used to write about, that they still write about, is the norm. And it puts us on the opposite side. It feels like a veil has fallen from their eyes, and they're now writing folk songs from the perspective of this boxcar riding through the end of the world. It's like, what is it, like boxcar cyberpunk? Post-American Americana? Sarah from A Future here. I want to explore a bit what I mean when I say post-American Americana. Murder by Death's song catalog already draws from what is arguably the spine of America, which is the outlaw West. The violence of the Old West is what underpins much action cinema today, even as its Western origins have been kind of washed away and sublimated into new forms of violent cinematic imperialism. The Americana that Murder by Death are drawing on is the Americana of what was... I mentioned earlier watching old Westerns. My dad showed me a lot of Westerns when I was a kid, and just a lot of cinema from the 40s and 50s, and it strikes me that it's a very boomer thing to be nostalgic for the America of the Old West when you could just sort of leave and go to a place where there were no rules and have your own land and your own life and live a whole world of adventure while killing people that don't matter. That's the sort of Americana that they're drawing from, and they're telling these cautionary tales, these fables about violent people doing violent things. It's very Deadwood in that respect. What connection do we actually have to the Old West? What connection do we have to Americana? At this point in 2022, everything has been transformed through so many different lenses and interpretations of multiple generations, just sort of remembering other people's memories of a time that none of them ever actually lived. Where so much of Murder by Death stuff before was cautionary fables about Old West guys. They've sort of transformed over the years, trying to find new ways to reckon with the paradoxical, self-destructive death drive of the outlaw, pulling that away from a character trope and sort of peeling back the fiction from album to album until you get to Spellbound, where it reveals this person, the outlaw, as a sort of fictional construct that we look at as if it is something that exists, as if it's its location within a historical fiction makes its moral depravity somehow okay, or at least forgettable. I don't want to go into too many songs in specific because this album just came out, so just go listen to it yourself. But here's one example, track 8, I'll Go. It starts off as a very straightforward country western song from the late 70s, but it starts to accrue this ethereal presence as the perspective character finds a woman who explicitly doesn't ask for money, names no cost, no price. Here's a guy blown back by kindness after a lonely life, realizing for the first time that people can connect in ways about more than just exchange of value. Later, he describes failing to conquer his fear as the world seems to tumble down around him. But instead of the oblivion you get in White Noise and The Day, this apocalypse has passed on like a natural disaster, leaving in its wake a world still alive and paradoxically full of kindness. Here, the apocalypse is depicted not as the closing of curtains, but the freeing of people from a raging monstrous dragon.
The cursed demon, finally dead.
It's like they're processing the unresolved tension of the apocalypses of their prior albums. And this means a lot to me, specifically because of my long history with this band. I said that I was going to tell a story about my internet friend Stacy. I went to visit her it was in Indiana, but we went to Cleveland for a show for Murder by Death. And that was the same week that I found out that my mom died. I was staying with her, sitting on the couch next to her. We were playing Rock Band together. And then I got a phone call from my sister that was like, are you sitting down? Mom died, and you have to find your way home. We lived in Texas at the time, but I was staying in Ohio with my dad, and I was in Indiana. And so I had to, the next day, because they wanted me to get back as soon as possible, and my flight back was supposed to be like, 3 or 4 days in the future. Instead, there was this whole shuffling of things, and I had to find my way from a bus to a taxi to the airport. Never taken a Greyhound before, never taken a taxi before. I was 19 years old. My mom just died, and I stayed awake for like 48 hours through this entire process, listening to Murder by Death, listening to In Bocca al Lupo and Boca and Rat of Tooth and Claw. And then 4 years later, I wrote Good Morning Magpie, the book, based on this album, fixated on this feeling of apocalypse and an apocalypse of the self as well as of the world. I'm no stranger to my own sort of life apocalypses. I feel like culturally we're all kind of obsessed with the apocalypse, and I think a lot of media has failed to really process it. And here, for this band to make an album that feels like it is processing the apocalypse and saying that there's gonna be some kind of after, means a lot to me because of my history with them, because so many of the bands that I used to love have just gone completely sour for one reason or another. But here they are making a song entitled Incantation that is just wishing death on the leaders of the world who have brought us to this moment. It's nice, they're not naming names. I don't want to oversell it as like a revolutionary thing, but it's good. It's good stuff, and it feels good to me as a fan of this band that it is as good as it is. And then the final track, Strange Song, just says, it's a strange song we've sung to each other. Now let's find another. It's sung with a tone of such resignation that's like benign, hopeful, while also still being mournful, because something has been lost. The death of this old world that was so cruel and terrible is still sad. It's where we grew up. It's what we were promised. We've lost a dream that was pernicious precisely because its fruit seemed so tempting. Even a rotten, violent nationalist myth still has to have some core appeal. And there's a melancholy to realizing that your nation doesn't care about you, that it will blow the entire world up before it'll give you a good, safe life without chronic illness or clinical depression. No one wanted to be here, but here we are. The beast is dead, and the task now falls to us to build a garden on its bones. That dream is the spell that has kept us bound to the endless, cruel churn of life under capitalism, destroying our bodies and lives for a little bit of profit, while a handful of guys vacuum up everything, and we're told we have to foot the bill. I might be editorializing a little bit here, but this is... there's no other way to put it. This is post-American Americana. Mythologizing is just part of the territory. It's about building a new world in the ashes of the old one. We've all been obsessed with the apocalypse. For decades, it's permeated cinema and television and all popular media. Well, certainly I've felt that the world was going to end since I was in high school, and not from nukes or anything, just sort of lack of care. I think we've all known that this was coming the whole time, and yet we did nothing to stop it. But what else could we do? Someone taught us wrong, and we believed it when we were told that the adults could handle it. Now, obviously, that we is very specific to my experience, but if you've had that experience, then yeah, you get it. It's about realizing that no one else is going to do it for you, and that we have to give up our old lives to build something better. It feels remarkable to me as an artistic evolution for a band whose willingness to experiment with so many different sounds without compromising what made them great in the first place already impressed me. Even the cover is like completely different from all of their other album covers. It's not like stylized. It's not, it is this like shattered Western apocalyptic landscape, and then the back is the same sort of shattered image, but it's just an inert ocean. So it feels already like this album is trying to deconstruct the images and things that they're most known for. And sonically, it feels much more mellow than their previous albums, but it doesn't lose any of the intensity or the vibrance of the instrumentation. It still feels very much like them, but it's a them that is somehow like more mature. As I've been editing this video and listening to Murder by Death's earlier albums, I have since kind of shifted my perspective just a little bit. I guess I hadn't listened to them as albums for a long time. I have a playlist that is all of my like favorite songs that I enjoy singing to, and so I mostly have just listened to that for the last like year or two. But I went back and have been listening to their earlier albums from start to finish, and what I've found is that they've actually always been very much about cautionary tales and the desire to be a good person and the desire to get the things that you want at any cost, and how these contradictory drives sort of destroy us. I talk some about the various apocalypses that are sprinkled around throughout their discography, and I don't want to give the impression that Spellbound is the very first time that they have complicated the sort of Southern Gothic fable structure that they draw on for their songs. It's more that it feels at times like a country western album that starts to accrue these kind of more distorted digital elements in places. It's never as cyberpunk as like synthwave or anything, but it's much more pared down, and it feels like a cyberpunk of now, of looking at the future from the burned out ruins of the Americana that was once the spine of this country that has driven us insane. But all of this is kind of subtext to the album for me, and obviously I'm bringing a lot of my baggage here to the album. I don't want to claim that all of this is strictly speaking intentional, but there is one thing that I didn't talk about elsewhere in this video that I am sort of amazed that I didn't talk about, which is the cellists. A lot of my interpretation of their work and this album specifically comes from the emotive side of things that is a lot harder to kind of convince you of from the position of me as a creator of videos, under a system where the absurdity of copyright law means that I can't just play the damn song for you or play like a bunch of different snippets side by side. Because there's a lot of ways that this album is intertextual with their previous albums, and I can't really go super in depth into without risking a takedown. But a huge part of that emotive element is Sarah Balit, who is the cellist, and I would argue that she is the second vocalist of Murder by Death, who is just as important as Adam Turla. Her cello solos frequently are what give these big apocalyptic breakdowns at the end of their albums and throughout their songs the weight and the heft that really sends them home. It's the combination of Turla's gruff, sort of old westy voice against the delicacy of Sarah's cello that really creates the sort of emotive dichotomy that makes their music so compelling to me, because it swings so quickly back and forth between admiring beauty and admiring rage and feeling both and being both. Can't really talk about this band without talking about Sarah's work. Great musician. And it's cool to see a band transform this kind of like Southern Gothic Americana to this post-American Americana that feels very much like their old stuff in spirit, but isn't tethered to a genre in quite the same way. And its relationship with that material, it feels almost like the second half of Mulholland Drive, like waking up from the dream, the American dream in this case. There's Turla writes more than once about dreams and waking up from the dream and associating the dream with freedom. And also there's a line about I didn't want to be a man without a country. It feels like waking up from that dream into a harsh reality, realizing that it's not other people, it's us, it's all of us. It's not criminals and outlaws, it's just us. And the world is falling apart as a result of forces that ultimately were set into motion long before we were born and will probably continue long after we're dead. But we're watching the four horsemen ride anyway. We're all waking up from this violent, terrible, oppressive American dream that promised us this freedom that was never really defined. It feels like an album about knowing that it's cost us so much to get here and mourning what it's cost us, but also feeling relief that it's finally fucking over. This horrible, horrible expectation is finally falling apart before our eyes. And yes, it sucks. It's gonna suck to rebuild this thing, but what's left over is gonna be so much better. The future is going to be so much better when all of this is done. We just gotta get there. We just gotta survive.
Get up out of your bed. The dawn is at your door. Just get up out of your bed. Can't sit on your hands no more.
All right, that's this video about the Murder by Death album, Spellbound. Wah! It's a good album. Go listen to it. Go listen to Murder by Death. I like them a lot, obviously, as I've said. Thank you to my $10 a month patrons. 12 Tone, Anarcho Duck, Anaphylaxis, Athiet, Austin McCauley, Bobby Jane DeForge, Caleb Hoover, Cam Chacon, Cynthia Darling, Dick Benigna, Duchess, Emma Sylvia, Eric Bossy, Evan Ritchie, Helena Brovelli, J. Mac D, J.B. Silbanary Wolf, Jane the Human, Jennifer Palmer, Catherine Jibes, L. Something Something, Morgan Hobson, Natalie Watts, Patrick Feeney, Pinball Witch, Quirk, Richard Dunbeck, Robin, Susie Minique, Z, Bellicose, Mad Figs, Optimistic Duelist, Rubeline, Scott Olson, Fuefos, Sky Player, Jay Jorts, Chthonic Syzyges, Joe Somebody 2, and Kate Shrike. Anyway, if you like this video and you want to support me in making more, you can go to patreon.com/LTAS or to camaraderie.co/SarahZedig. For as little as $5 a month, you get access to all my notes and scripts. I'm gonna scan the many pages of this that I hand wrote last night. I am going to be posting a new thing that is a fun little video that I made called How Not to Play Guitar. That'll be available to $5 patrons exclusively, hopefully by the time this video is out. This video is a weird one. I haven't done a video about music before. I have one that I've been planning for a while that's about the Talking Heads film Stop Making Sense. But that is different because I'm going to be talking about that film as a musical. I've never just talked about music, and it's difficult to do that on YouTube with copyright algorithms. I'm going to see if I can pull it off with what I have chosen. I've tried to be selective here and in a way that I can maybe skirt the copyright algorithm. We'll see if I pull it off. I guess let me know. Tell me in the comments what you think of this little analysis. I definitely didn't plan to make this video, and there's no, like, I've never talked to anybody about, I've never talked to anybody in Murder by Death. I don't know any of them. They don't know me. I sent them a manuscript of the book that I wrote like years ago, and I never heard anything, so I don't know. Maybe they've read it, maybe they haven't. It doesn't matter either way. I just like the band, I like the album, and I decided that it would be cool to get a video out on the same weekend as the album comes out, because it's good. I think it's a pretty remarkable little album that deserves to get a boost, especially because they're doing this themselves. They're not working with a record label as far as I can tell. They're putting this thing out themselves, and that's very impressive. You know, it's funny. I've been working on this other video about the video game Tunic, and that was supposed to come out like 3 months ago, but I have been struggling to sort of reach into the core of what I wanted to talk about that was really compelling me, and I kept talking around it. And oddly enough, I think working on this video helped clarify for me what I wanted to talk about with Tunic. So hopefully that is something that I will have finished and out soon. I've also got a video that I've recorded already about the Marvel film Shang-Chi, which I found to be remarkable precisely because it wasn't remarkable, but I'll leave myself in the past to tell you my opinion about that in the future. Also, I have a podcast, the Trans Questioning Podcast. Every other week is me talking about gender and politics. I did one recently about going to Pride and feeling like I had permission to be attracted to strangers for the very first time in my life. It's a good episode, I think. I am pretty happy with it, at least. Also, read Godfeels, my Homestuck fanfiction. Sure, yeah, I'll promote that here. Go read that. Link to that in the description. Link to all this crap in the description. Go just scroll down and click some links, man. Just dig on into that description hole. What do they call it? The doobly-doo? Oh, whatever. Go down into the diddly-wop and fetch me tuppence of licorice. What am I saying? Thanks for watching my YouTube video about a Murder by Death album. I hope you have a pleasant weekend or a day or month, whatever time of year it is for you. Thank you for hanging out with me. This one got away from me. This one's weird. I hope you have a good time. See you in another life, brother.